class. This is Xyy Coach. Today's lesson is going to be distinguishing between Xyy and Xyy emotive expression. Before we get into more of the physiological cues, let's do a quick recap on some technical elements. Xyy, which is what I have, is directive, objective, values-based discernment. And it's important that throughout the film I'll be talking about Xyy and Xyy. I have Xyy personally, consciously, and that's what you'll be seeing me demonstrate. There's going to be a follow-up to this filming, which will be a laboratory that will include a bunch of celebrities that Xylene's going to go over for you, distinguishing Xyy and Xyy in action in some interviews. When you're watching her instruct that, though, throughout the entire instructional, she, as a Xyy, actually has Xyy consciously, so she'll be demonstrating all those cues personally herself. To compare Xyy, Xyy is adaptive, subjective, values-based discernment. In more conversational speak, such as like the power flow keywords, Xyy can be thought of as charisma, persuasion, code of conduct, etiquette, things of that nature, rituals, whereas Xyy is empathizing, resonating, internalizing, gut reactions, things of that nature. So to give it a bit of a conversational context to it, to start the comparisons. Now, physiologically, as far as the cues manifested, they will be correlated to what the powers do in the psyche. So the Xyy, emotive expressioning, is going to be aware in nature because it's an articulator power. So it is values-based, but it's used to move the environment, to do objective dynamics, dynamic steering with a values-based power. For that reason, its emotive expressioning has a aware aspect. And we'll get a little more into what that means exactly, but that's a general theme for Xyy, aware. This is in counterpoint to Xy's unaware expression, and this is because the purpose of Xyy in the psyche is to keep equilibrium, and so it's responding to stimulus and keeping stability, keeping equilibrium, and so it's a personal adaptive function for the psyche for Xyy users, and therefore the expressions that are going over their face are not designed to actively move the environment. They may move the environment because of the way the unaware expressioning hits the environment, but that's not why they personally are doing it. Xyy users are doing the unaware expressioning because of how things are hitting them personally. We'll jump around here a little bit between some more like very sort of forensic-y kind of things, and then also a little more artistic, because there's both elements in comparing the Xyy with the Xyy. We'll start with Xyy. You will notice a general downward U of the mouth often. Even mouths that aren't shaped in a downward U, they have the fine musculature around the mouth for emoting, naturally kind of pulls into a downward U. This contrasts with Xyy, which the musculature around the mouth, the fine mouth, naturally pulls, very subtle, but it pulls it up into an upward U. So Xyy has a downward U shape to the mouth, and you'll see a lot of this actually in the actual physical construction of the mouth of Xyy users. But even Xyy users who have like a more straight oval mouth, or even an upturned mouth as far as like just the basic construct of it, the musculature that moves it though naturally pulls into a downward arc. Downward U arc for Xyy users, but for Xyy users, the opposite. It naturally pulls up. It pulls up with the tensioning. So that's something to look out for between the two and on a physiological cue basis. Another element is with Xyy, because it's an articulation power, it thinks in terms of agenda and articulation being a directive power, and thus has a beginning, middle, and end. So you'll notice that Xyy users, they close their mouth at the end of like a beat, like I'm speaking to you now, and then I close at the end there. That's because I'm aware of what my mouth is doing in an emotive way. So once it's done emoting the way I want it to, it kind of pauses until it's ready to move again, ready for action, because it is directive and thus aware. Xyy, on the other hand, tends to be open. So when it's emoting more, it tends to have more of an open, loose quality to it, as opposed to the more closed and tension energy that you'll see with the Xyy user. Xyy, as it gets more emotive, the mouth opens more, and often the downward U will come into it as well. And just generally, as they're talking or just being, you'll notice that the mouth kind of just hangs more slack than Xyy users. Xyy users' mouth, both directives and adaptives who are Xyy users, their mouth does that. And Xyy users, the opposite. Doesn't matter if they're directive or adaptive Xyy users, their mouth tends to be a bit, they close it, open it on point, and when it's not being used, it stays at the ready a bit. Going along with the downward U and upward U's we talked about, for Xyy, you'll notice that there's more energetic tensioning in general. And this is for adaptives and directives who use Xyy on the upper lip. The upper lip tends to have more native energy, and the lower lip kind of follows along. With Xyy users, it's the opposite. The native energy that comes into it is the lower lip. The lower lip for the opening, the downward U, the going slack. So the bottom lip tends to have more energy in it when it's emoting for the Xyy users than the upper lip. The upper lip gets into it, but sort of like the lower lip tends to do its thing first, and then the upper lip follows, whereas for Xyy users, it's the opposite. The upper lip comes up and sort of animates a little bit. It's very slight, but like it tends to animate just always slightly first and more, and it pulls the lower lip along. And for Xyy, the opposite. The lower lip sags down first a bit, pulls down first, opens up first, and then the upper lip follows just a little bit after. Xyy has an emotive spectrum of joyful and mournful. So when it's feeling good at equilibrium, like equilibrium is going the way it wants, it's at harmony, then there is oh, this is really great, I'm having such a good time, and oh, this is really good and healing and wonderful, and they're feeling that inside for themselves, that this is a good thing, and so the expression given off is joy, but it is unaware. If they're in pain or if things aren't going well, then they're going to actually have that mournful quality to it. But again, it's coming from how their Xyy tower is being impacted by the environment or thoughts in their psyche. Whereas for Xyy users, they go on a butter baleful spectrum. So it tends to have more of a universal quality or an all quality. So it is structured and designed around humans, but it's about situations. It understands situations, scenes, beginning, middle, end of a scene, the opening of a scene, the exiting of a scene. So there is a quality of this. This meaning my emotive experience, your emotive experience, our emotive experience, this moment, this situation. So Xyy with butter and baleful gives the thing of like this, you and I, it's going well. This, you and I, it's not cool. I'm not grooving with you. So because it's designed to connect or disconnect with others, Xyy will actually have the butter and baleful, which is designed to position the other person in relation to how you feel about them and the situations you find both of you in, all of you in. Xyy thinks in that terms. I'm with the other humans, and how do I feel about what us humans are doing? Do I agree with that? Am I okay with that? If I am, then cool, good job, team. This is going well. If it's not going well, I'm like no good. And then Xyy, it's more like yes, this is so good, Oh, no good. It's the same kind of thing in a way, but it's inward and instead of outward. I just mentioned it at the tail end of the last one, but I'll just touch on a little bit more, which is the inward versus outward. The Xyy is directive, but it's also objective, so it is outwardly oriented. So when you see the person actually engaging with the environment more, being outward in their focus, Xyy users, their mode of expression will come up. Whereas with Xyy users, as they go into themselves, their mode of expressioning will increase. So where you see this increase is, for example, in swaybacks, When a person is a Xyy user, they use Xyy consciously. It's very difficult to isolate cues because you can do it for like, frenzy kind of thing, but in real like native action, it doesn't tend to be like that because it's always being grouped with other things. So it's helpful to note what Xyy tends to be grouped with. So swing back. So that the emotive expressioning not only will increase and give off those other things we just talked about, it will tend to often be paired with the pulling back of the head to the side or back into the side. That's with Xyy. Compare that with Xyy is jutting. Often when there is jutting, you'll notice that the emotive expressioning is, oh, come on now, like that, like, did you feel me? Do you hear me? As you jut, often the emotive will go in concert with that if it is a Xyy user. Then with the eyes, Xyy is not actually directly associated with the eyes, but it is an objective power. So it goes along with objective power use. So for example, double barreling. When someone's getting going and you can tell they're using both their articulator and their objective perception, this is actually going to, with Xyy users, when they're double barreling and they're getting going, their emotive expression will be increasing as they double barrel. Compare that with Xyy users. As they do 1,000-yard stare, particularly as they disengage to the right, that will actually bring an increase in their emotive expression. Whereas the more they come out and double barrel, like take Xyy or Nija, when they're double barreling, then their emotive expressioning is going to be dropping more. Whereas it's I double barrel, any of the PSAers out there, Lyra, Mitchell, any of them out there, when we're actually getting going, whenever we start getting into an objective double barreling groove, the emotive expressioning will naturally increase. Whereas with any of the Xyy users, Xyy, Nija, when they actually disengage to the right, often there will be an increase in that the Xyy emotive expressioning correspondent with the eye use, going inward. Another one is the shoulder shrugs. The right shoulder shrug indicates using a tower. Left shoulder shrug indicates using an objective discernment, an articulator. So now talking about the Xyz, and both of them have a shoulder with them. So for a Xyy user, as they use their left shoulder, that tends to be going with articulation. It's almost like kind of jutting. And so as that happens, often, hey, how you doing? It's not making a joke here, but that tends to go in concert with Xyy emotive expression increase. So jutting, double barreling, the shrugging of the left shoulder, those things, if you're a Xyy user, they tend to increase the emotive expressioning along with it. For Xyy users, it's the disengaging to the right, it's the right shoulder shrug, it's swaying back, tilting, etc. When you use certain words, you sometimes have to, get into the semantics of it a little bit, and sometimes it's even necessary to use or to define a distinct use of that word in a certain setting or situation, such as podlair. So we use the terms authentic with Xyy and charismatic with Xyy. This doesn't mean that Xyy cannot be charismatic, because there's a lot of Xyy mojos in the pop culture that are very, very charismatic to many, many people, and vice versa, Xyy users who can't be authentic. We're using a very kind of strict meaning of those words, truly mathematical use of those words. So in this context, the use of Xyy authentic means because it comes from being impacted, and then the Xyy just responds before it connects to articulation, Z. But before it does that, so the expression comes pre or sans articulation. For that reason, if you were observing this, if you were reading this, then those emotions are more raw in a way, more without machination. Okay, so they're without machination at that point, although they can obviously get that through being connected with Z. But natively, they don't possess that. So that gives off a distinct signal. So you can use the word authentic to refer to any mojo being authentic of spirit. But in this specific case, in mojo reading, we use the word authentic with Xyy to mean specifically that it just gives an instant emotive reaction to how it feels on the impact it just received. And so that actually does not have any artifice to it yet. It doesn't mean that you can't use Xyy to give it that. It doesn't mean Xyy on its own cannot use it. It's ways to manipulate that can actually happen, and vice versa. Xyy can adopt properties of Xyy, positive and negative, but in the context of Mojo reading, the term charismatic mathematically means that everything that you say and do has a interpersonal bonus modifier on it, and that's true. Anyone who uses Xyy consciously, there is no neutral on articulation. You can try to bring that in with Xyy, but it doesn't actually have that natively. Natively, Xyy is always going to see if there shouldn't be more deferential or dominant brought in, more butter or more baleful, more friendly or unfriendly. So that actually will bonus stack the way you hand someone their cup. It will bonus stack the way you say their name in positive or negative ways. But Xyy naturally, anytime it articulates, it just, without Xyy, it is natively just going to bonus stack it based on the butter baleful that the Xyy feels on the subject. Its opinion will bonus stack it for the audience, positive or negative. Some I alluded to, I'll just kind of point them out in particular now, is that if you do have Mojo reading to where you can see other parts of the theory, besides, this is a beginner lesson, but if you've had other training, you are aware of other powers and other fields, so you can use that. So you will note that those who actually have Xyy, it's paired with Xyy. So if you don't see those paired together, there's an issue there, because those two always go together. And Xyy, it'll be paired with, Xyy, it'll be paired with Xyy. So that's another thing you can look for, is am I seeing Xyy or Xyy? You can actually use a logic-based modulator pairing to help you break that case. Also, sort of I touched on, but I'll mention specifically, is articulating, speaking in general, is more Xyy. Xyy can give a motive resonating to articulating, but it is the Xyy that is actually causing the articulation, the communication between you and something else, another entity. Whereas with Xyy, that actually comes with the articulation. One thing that might help highlight this is, because often the towers and the articulators, they're working so closely together when you're engaging. So with Xyy, you'll notice that the emotive tends to come up in the period after a pause and before the next pause. So if you kind of follow that rhythmic beat, there's always like articulate, pause, articulate, resonate, right? Articulate, resonate. So speak, pause. In the speaking phase, the Xyy users will pick up their emoting, and on the pause, it'll drop. With the Xyy users, the opposite. As they speak, it tends to be flat and deadpan, and then on the pauses, in comes the Xyy. So actually in between their speaking, actually as they take their breaths often, they do their emoting. That's something else too, like you can't match this exactly because it's so complex, but there is a trend here of the Xyy emotive expressioning happening more on the intake of air, as opposed to the Xyy, it's on the speaking, right? It's projecting outward. Yeah, basically it does match the breath, particularly strong inhalations and strong exhalations where you can tell that the emotive rhythm is matching that beat. Right there, you saw that. It doesn't happen all the time, but there's periods where you'll notice that a person, when they're breathing in or they're breathing out, right, sighing, moaning, grunting, things of this nature, when they're anything like that, there tends to be a more pronounced use of air, almost like a wind instrument. So noting that whether or not the emotive increases on the air going outward, it tends to be more Xyy, and then inward is Xyy. Both the Xyz powers can be extremely appealing to other people, pulls on them in an emotional, personal way, a deep way. There are very big differences, but it may be slight when you first start taking a look at these, but they're worth noting, is that Xyy tends to be more, when say it's doing its thing as far as making an appeal to others, or being appealing to others. It often tends to be seductive or enticing. It's actively aware that it is making this engagement. Whereas Xyy, it tends to have an air of vulnerability, and that air of vulnerability is also extremely appealing. And again, Xyy can be used to be seductive, and Xyy can actually be innocent. A code of conduct can actually cause the Xyy user to be innocent and more of a more traditional use of those words. But here we're using it mathematically. So mathematically, that's how it applies. So Xyy tends to be seductive, enticing. Xyy is vulnerable and innocent. And this goes along with the other things we said before because of their functions in the psyche. Something else to look for is the tongue. For Xyy users, you'll notice that there can be a tendency for them to both do it more and for it to be in sync with their emotive expressioning, is for the tongue to drape downward or curl upward like this, and just a general lolling, L-O-L-L-I-N-G, a lolling of the tongue. So kind of, and it's unaware, the expression's unaware, emotive expressioning is increasing, and the tongue becomes less actively articulate. It begins to lose its articulation powers as it gets more deeply into the emotive resonating. With Xyy users, it's different. Like, you can tell here, I'm pressing my tongue into the back of my teeth, up here, also down here. Also, the tongue, it tends to flick out, and it flicks and then it rests on the bottom teeth or the upper teeth, just like most other things that are done that are directive in nature. We mentioned that, like, say, directives in general tend to actually have a beginning, middle, end to their gesturing. So when they're not doing a gesture, it kind of just pauses in the air or pauses on their leg or whatever. You'll notice this with Xyy, and this includes adaptives who use Xyy, but Xyy is a directive emotive articulator. So when it's not doing anything, it pauses, it holds its position ready to move again outwardly. It has more tension. The Xyy tongue has more tension, particularly as it is emotively articulating. Whereas with Xyy, as it's emoting more, it loses tension. The tongue goes slack commiserately with the increase of emotive expressioning. So there can be intense emoting, but then the lip will go down, the mouth will open, the tongue will sometimes loll or hang out or curl up, and all these things are unaware in nature. Since I brought up Yang Yin, I'll just toss it in there. Xyy is a directive power. So when the gesturing is more Yang, if the person is a Xyy user, since they're using their left side powers, which go along with Yang gesturing, they'll be like I'm doing now. There'll be increase in the Xyy emotive expressioning as the gestures become more outward, more percussive, more directing, more steering. With Xyy users, like again Jalene or Nisha, or any of the other samples we put out, is the gestures when they're going yin, they're becoming more yin-like. You'll also notice that it tends to go along with the Xyy emotive expression increasing. So as they go more yin, if they have Xyy, that is on the right side. This means they're using right side powers. You'll often see a connection between increase in the Xyy emotive expressioning and yin gesturing. Jalene's going to give you some samples coming up, but you can do your own research as well and do compare and contrast things that you'll want to do, which Jalene will be doing coming up next for you in some specific samples, is comparing, for example, Xyy alpha with Xyy alpha. and see if you can tell the difference between them. And then also move the emotive expressioning downward in the hierarchy and compare that way. Yeah, that'd be kind of cool to kind of just follow it all the way down the chart. Take it from the source position and then move it all the way down and compare it to another mojo that has the same kind of, the same thing, but with the other values-based power. And I believe that's how Xyy is going to be setting up the different samples coming up in the lab. Xyy will be giving more in the specific lab samples coming up, but just as a general concept, there are differences between men and women and how these come about that you should pay attention for. With the Xyy, you'll find that males who have Xyy, they tend to either consciously or instinctually try and mute often some of the more innocent, vulnerable aspects that Xyy has. So you'll notice that there tends to be more of a habitual Xyy closing of the mouth to sort of decrease that open mouth quality, that slack mouth quality that Xyy has. That can be interpreted as being vulnerable, and males may not want to be seen that way for meme reasons, for example. And so they will make adjustments. But it doesn't change the fact that they have Xyy, and Xyy works the way it does. But you will notice that they tend to style it a bit differently that way. Then with Xyy, the Xyy females, something they have to watch out for by memes, not to say they're on peak pathway, but memes, is that when Xyy goes on the deferential side, it can be very solicitous. And that solicitous nature of Xyy with females has to watch out that's not being seen as, giving off signals to someone else that are not what you're doing. You're just being nice, you're being kind, you're being considerate, but it may come across as maybe flirtatious or something. That wasn't what it was meant to be. It was solicitous. But females have to watch out for the solicitous aspect of Xyy coming off in that way. Then also the dominant side of Xyy, the baleful side of Xyy, is very, very dominant, and often females, the values-based power that's associated with them through memes, not actuality, they have both, but what's associated with memes tends to be more of either Xyy or deferential Xyy. So when they go into the non-deferential side of Xyy, they can be seen as domineering, aggressive in a values-based way, and so they may get dinged for that, even though they may be doing it perfectly heroically. So that's just something to note. This doesn't mean it doesn't go both ways, because it does. For example, a lot of ladies who use Xyy, they also try to mute those innocent or vulnerable qualities that Xyy gives off, because Xyy, particularly Xyy mojo females, tend to actually get a lot of like stalker magnet attraction they don't want, and they consciously or unconsciously realize it has something to do with the Xyy they're doing, and they try to mute that signal. Then also the guys who use Xyy being directive, it is dominant, so that part can be seen not so bad for men by memes, but the issue is the volatility, the passion, the flex factor. So it's quite common for Xyy user males, even Xyy mojos, those that have Xyy as momentum, to use a lot of Xyy to kind of flatten out that Xyy signal. Not so much because of the deferential dominance aspect, but more just it has so much flex in general. The flexation, the not being in control, that perceived lack of control can cause that as well. So all mojos, male and female, who use Xyy and Xyy can more or less get into their power based on the reactions memes have given them, and then how they condition themselves accordingly. With that said, I will now turn it over to Xyy, so look forward to the lab coming up next.